Demon's Souls is a game that, like many of its successors, has stood the test of time, a test that, quite frankly, everyone expected it to fail. Even leading up to the release of the remake, there's been a small but dedicated community centered around playing the original game, for single and multiplayer, even if they rarely overlapped. However, it is strange to me that despite having every advantage in 8 years' worth of player experience and feedback, Bluepoint's Demon's Souls remake almost exclusively thrives on its gorgeous aesthetics, orchestration, and animation, forsaking many of the issues of game balance and multiplayer, while introducing new problems that had previously been non-issues. It is for this reason that I posit my doubt as to the game's relative longevity, especially when compared to other titles of the Souls series, amongst other games. As a disclaimer, and for the sake of having some semblance of objectivity for this video, I must say that the Demon's Souls remake is not a dead game, as so many critics would like to proclaim. There's plenty of activity in early and mid-levels, and there's going to be activity for a very long time. Not necessarily good or fun activity, but activity. But it did get me thinking about how we think about games and their life cycles, through the lens of how active it is. Demon's Souls is not so much dead as hamstrung by a variety of circumstances, but we'll get to that. What does it mean for a game to have longevity? A simple definition we could use is that a game has longevity when a community is able to sustain multiplayer past a game's expiration date, be that the release of a new title in the same lineage, or even the release of a new console generation. So what kind of qualities would a game like this have to possess? I guess an easy way to start thinking about this question would be to look at what games have failed to last, or what games have died, for lack of a better term. Now, it's hard to say a game dies, since some group of people will still be playing it, however small, but rather in terms of how active is this game in relation to its counterparts. I know you should play what games are fun for you, and that enjoyment is subjective, but a large part of whether or not a community considers a game dead or alive is rooted mostly in perception. Your individual experience might be that a game is living on through your playing of it, but if the servers for your multiplayer game have the same 3 people cycling through them, I'm not exactly sure that can be classified as a living game. It's not so much an argument of semantics as it is a vibe. Street Fighter II Turbo is a game that occasionally has tournaments, yeah, but is it thriving and evolving? What about games whose official servers are deactivated, like Mario Kart DS? Are games with a low Twitch presence dead? Games that are fun, deep, and replayable all tend to outlive other games within their respective genre. But not always. Let me introduce you to a game that had all 3 of these features, and still faded into obscurity. Kid Icarus Uprising is a dead game, but a dead game with a number of things that it had going for it, namely that it was, objectively, quite fun, if sales figures and reviews are anything to go off of. It is, in my opinion, one of Nintendo's best games. You had the ability to create unique builds with 108 unique weapons in 12 classes, and a variety of utility powers to choose from. Games journalists criticized the unintuitive control scheme, which also led to poor reception from casual players, who struggled with the deeper nuance of the multiplayer mechanics. Now, as far as I can tell, the servers are still up for this game, but the last time I played it, the servers were mostly bots. Bots that the developers put in the event that the servers were ever desolate enough to not have enough players to fill matches. Kid Icarus Uprising is functionally dead, and dead enough that players haven't really pushed for a remake on any new console. With Nintendo's current business practices, I couldn't see another title in the series happening, but I mean, you never know. Games are temporary like us. Like Kid Icarus, games are born and then they die. Except sometimes they don't. Super Smash Bros. Melee is a game that has proven itself to possess true longevity, even well after it should have perished and further past what Nintendo considered profitable, to the point that Nintendo tried to kill it multiple times, both directly and indirectly. This is further discussed in a video by the YouTuber Fudj called A History of Nintendo and Anti-Consumerism, which will be linked below. The Melee community specifically, not the wider Smash community, continues to support their game in the form of mods that give the game netplay capabilities with rollback netcode, done by Fizzy. Even after being forsaken by community figureheads and large tournament organizers in favor of Nintendo sponsorships, which are mostly just for prestige, the Melee community thrives and flourishes. Why? Because the game itself is deep and fun enough to keep players coming back, even the ones who are new and that struggle. I mean, there's also tournaments, and the game itself is great for spectators, but that's all kind of a given. Like it or not, all of the Dark Souls games, alongside Bloodborne, possess a kernel of this longevity. Dark Souls 3 above all others seems to be the game to invade in, even to this day. It's the most recent Dark Souls game, but it's not exactly new. It's been out for almost 5 years. Activity is still plentiful, just not at all soul levels, in all areas, all the time. Unless you use Wex Dust, but that's only available for PC. We don't call Dark Souls 3 dead because it's being played by Souls personalities with platforms and audiences, who in turn want to see more Dark Souls 3 content. Dark Souls 3 has such a deep invasion system relative to the other titles that I can almost guarantee if Elden Ring has less than stellar invasion mechanics, then everyone will keep on playing Dark Souls 3. Probably for similar reasons as the other games before it, but also in something more unique. I feel, based on personal experience, that there's been more research into the technique of Dark Souls PvP than the games before it. There's this body of research that has a wide range of tech and exploits that break and unbreak the game in various ways, on top of good but not great variety in playstyles and builds. Dark Souls 1 and 2 have tech and research on them, but not to the extent of 3. For Dark Souls 3, invasions are supremely challenging, more challenging than ever before, in fact, but gratifying to win. I can't say much for the dueling scene, but when it comes to invasions, there's just slightly more depth than previous titles, in a generally more balanced package. It's still a broken mess, and you could lose every invasion on principle alone, but in the attempt there is a certain draw, and that draw via depth is what gives it longevity. Now that we've talked about other games, and we've arrived at Demon Souls, what would hamper the longevity of its multiplayer? First of all, there are issues that are well beyond Bluepoint's control. First of all, there's the accessibility issue. No one can get a PS5 right now. Demon Souls is a Sony exclusive. On the PS5, a system that very few people can get, and fewer still will actually want to buy. It's a $600 expense in the middle of a pandemic, recession, and the greatest moment of wealth inequality in modern history. Now you could go ahead and play the original Demon Souls on PS3 or an emulator, but no one in their right mind is playing that version right now. That one has a problem of its own in that there's no invasion matchmaking, which, I mean, at least allows matches to occur, but it's not ideal. These issues have been discussed at length, and they're not really anything we can do anything about. So, it isn't entirely Bluepoint's fault that the longevity of Demon Souls has been compromised right off the bat. Then there are the problems that are directly Bluepoint's fault, which I'm not going to cover in depth because Demon Souls savant Astri has already done so in his wonderful video, which will be linked below. To summarize the state of things, and not for further analysis because it's already been done to death, here are some of the invasion-level problems with the remake. Lack of meaningful weapon balance changes, lack of necessary weapon matchmaking, no disconnect penalty, no real incentive to invade outside of personal satisfaction, introduction of mechanics that are indisputably bad, such as stealth buffs, invisible blue spawn, no password summon level scaling, no souls for killing a phantom or host, and you can't run past or kill mobs. Then there are the problems that plague the dueling side of things. The constructed environment of a tournament or fight club exempts the experience from the same sorts of criticism that the invasion and summoning dynamic requires, since many of the rules are created by the player rather than the outer confines of the game itself. Needless to say, the game has suffered even in this realm. I contacted Astri directly to ask about the state of Demon Souls dueling, and the following information regarding duels has come directly from him. Once again, I'm not going to analyze this too much, but just present some of the issues that exist so that we can proceed with exigence. First of all, there's been a shift in player mentality which has led to the rise of toxic personalities, as well as the popularization of tactics that were previously off-limits in tournaments and most fight clubs. Since grass no longer stacks to 99, and there's mostly no grass dueling, The regen Faith has become the go-to meta setup for its strength in both dueling and non-dueling scenarios, which makes some fights last as long as 20 minutes. The update from 30 frames a second to 60 frames per second nerfs slower weapons by making them easier to react to, and in fact reaction rolling makes avoiding just about every weapon in the game easier, and makes for much more passive play. Weapon moveset changes have made curved swords and rapiers more dominant, and various guaranteed wake-up options, as from the Great Axe, now allow for one-shot combos that were previously not possible. And none of this would be particularly egregious on its own if Demon's Souls had been sold as more of a reimagining of the original. But it was sold as a remake. It's in the title, remake being defined as to make again. I hate to do semantics, but it's important for my next point. I'm going to give Bluepoint the benefit of the doubt here, and presume that early on in development, when they were allocating resources, it was decided by creative director Gavin Moore that making the PvP a balanced, or even fun, experience was not a deal-breaker. Curiously enough, however, making the PvP exactly the same as the original was not a deal-breaker either. So what was the design goal? For a little background, we should probably talk about the interview with Gavin Moore. Mostly just this one clip.
We were given the blessing of the original creators from software to go ahead and, make a remake of such a beloved title, and they haven't been involved in the production of the game. That's all been handled by Worldwide Studios and Bluepoint Games. We're obviously staying true to the original vision. I mean, that's incredibly important.
Outside of the multiplayer and world tendency changes, the game is functionally identical. So in regards to single player, the experience would have been preserved, but the changes that were made to the multiplayer so deeply alter and cheapen the experience that I have to ask if any substantial development time was invested into it. And yeah, we got dedicated servers and supremely smooth netcode, so someone had to know what they were doing on that particular front, but in regards to preserving the original experience, Bluepoint was unsuccessful. Perhaps the original vision for Demon's Souls was something vastly inferior, but that doesn't make any sense. Just because From Software intended for the experience to be worse doesn't mean that Bluepoint had to go with it. It's just strange when all the new problems are so well documented. Like, why not patch not being able to run through mobs? As a side note, if you rewatch the whole interview, you'll notice this.
On that note, was there ever any discussion of, again, balancing magic? Because as it's widely known that magic is crazy, crazy powerful in this game in comparison to the ones that came later.
There was, turning down magic, but, if you picked a magic user at the beginning of the game, you were at a big disadvantage. You're much weaker than your, armored, compatriots. There's a big disadvantage to just playing with magic at the beginning of the game.
So this is a really baffling claim to make. It's not just wrong, it's completely wrong. Everyone knows this. It's such a fundamental, basic thing for players of the original that the magic classes can trivialize large chunks of the game early on, and it's still true. I don't know what to make of this interview because there are really good things about it, and then there's a lot of weird shit like this. You can't say your design goal was to preserve the original vision and also make sweeping changes for which you do not understand the consequences. Unless, of course, they did understand. In order to really get underneath the why of this whole affair, we have to understand intended gameplay, a concept which SaintRiot has a great video about, and I'll link it below. The real reason why Demon's Souls is at such risk of decay is a conflict between intended gameplay and how players want to play the game. This is the reason why Super Smash Bros. Brawl competitively died as fast as it did, within 6 months of release, according to those involved in the scene at the time. Casualization of the game for an audience that was primarily competitive forced them to retreat to a more competitive environment, which for most of them was Melee. This isn't the case with Demon's Souls. It's not a competitive fighting game. With the addition of more possible invaders, 3 versus 3 brawls are now possible, and in those brawls there is supposed to be a winner. But with fixed spawns and the potential for blue phantoms to one-shot invaders on spawn, there's not ever going to be more than one invader in a world at a time, and very briefly at that. Bluepoint has made an attempt to force the mechanic into its original niche, where players will use it solely to stay in body form and make the game easier for themselves, opening them up for invasions as well as feeding into the tendency mechanic. But here's the problem. The game's been out for 11 years. If players really want the game to be easier, they aren't going to be opening themselves up to the possibility of making the game any harder by getting invaded or moving towards pure black world tendency. Literally no one is going to do that. There are quite a few many players that have taken the invasion mechanics and made them the focus of their experience, and were allowed within the confines of the original game to do this quite smoothly. You still can chain invade, but since you can't get souls from invasions now, unless you save a backup, you have to farm grass and spice on your own time. There isn't even a pantheon slot for killing people in body form, so at the end of the day, the only reason a person would be invading in Demon Souls is if they felt some satisfaction from doing it. Which, I mean, is the reason invaders invade in almost all of the Souls games. What's so different about Demon Souls? They're all broken and janky, and you complaining seems out of place when all of the other games are equally hostile to its players, both host and invader. This is a fair stance to have. And you know what? I still am going to invade in Demon Souls, for the same reason that everyone else is still invading in Demon Souls. There's the off chance that I don't get a gank that knows what they're doing, and that I actually either have a fair fight, or I get some new players, in which case the fight might end up a little bit one-sided. But it's gonna be one-sided either way. I guess the thing that bothers me most is that Demon Souls was always the little game that could, you know? The little game that came out on top and turned the whole world upside down. And with the chance to remake it in its truest, most perfected incarnation, there are certain expectations that come with that, namely, that you expect a large chunk of the game to be at least as good as it was instead of substantially worse. This is the most disappointing thing, that Bluepoint had every opportunity to make Demon Souls perfect. But it's not quite there. I think it was fairly obvious even a week after release that Bluepoint's primary, perhaps even single-minded focus was creating an aesthetically attractive product, which shows. The game is a console seller, it got me, and I love the game. It would maybe be unfair to judge them on their handling of the multiplayer if, within the walls of Bluepoint Studios, there was never really any intention to bother making multiplayer accurately reflect the original. It shows in their work and in the result. They have told us in their deeds and actions, and we don't have to pretend like this is something they ever focused on. We just have to accept it for what it is, and either move on or push for the change ourselves. When a company sells a game, they almost always benefit from disposability, or less severely, a specific window of time that a game is expected to be purchased within. The matter of a game being played at all is wholly irrelevant when it comes to profit motive. Did the company sell enough of the game, or did it not? Demon Souls is not a live service game. Live service is a sunken cost when there's no potential for profit. You can't buy loot boxes, or there's no downloadable content, there's no cosmetics, there's nothing. Bluepoint is free to leave the game in as broken a state as they wish. So long as the gorgeous veneer of the game is aesthetically desirable, it'll entice the common player regardless of what's going on under the hood. Single-player experiences are mostly what players are going to buy Demon Souls for. It's an RPG. You buy the game to play a role, and I can hardly blame them for angling their production towards that end. So what can we do about this? To be honest, very little. Companies only understand two things: loss of profit and overwhelmingly negative feedback, and the second one doesn't ever work if the first is not at least a plausibility. The Demon Souls remake can only sell as well as PS5s are selling right now, so it's kind of difficult to compare the opening sales costs of the original Demon Souls to this one, since the original didn't even have any marketing going for it. As for negative player feedback, there have been attempts to reach out to Bluepoint on Twitter, but the reception of the single-player experience is so overwhelmingly positive that I doubt it would really do anything. It's the highest-rated Souls game on Metacritic. You can't deny that the game itself is good. It's really good. And despite still having these glaring, horrible, unsightly flaws, Bluepoint's not going to patch the game anymore. A vast majority of players won't really care, or actually directly benefit from the game's disposable multiplayer, in their single-player experiences, because their summoned phantoms can be stronger, the strength of overleveled summons will incentivize ganking activity, and requires degenerate strategies from all invaders, even against otherwise innocuous hosts. There'll be less total invaders due to not really having as much of an incentive as other games, and the lack of options for altering world tendency without a friend will also invite degenerate strategies. Hosts will be encouraged to disconnect because there's no penalty whatsoever, in order to prevent them from moving towards pure black. And it also inhibits the invader's ability to move towards pure black by getting their body form and dying in a level. This ability to negate losses through disconnecting is antithetical to the design of multiplayer, of any multiplayer, and it's confusing that there's never been and still isn't some sort of penalty, even a tiny one. This isn't a truly serious issue like racism in America, or widespread poverty and wealth inequality, or healthcare accessibility, real problems that require energy and attention and mobilization to even begin to fix. The quality of multiplayer in Demon's Souls Remake isn't even worth a fraction of the thought those systemic issues present. So then what does it matter? I can't help but feel that, although the game turned out great, it still has the same sadness that the original game had. Not in the somber, desolate environments or the stark, soulless world, but a lingering what if. A what could have been. Could Demon's Souls have ever been immortal? Probably not. Even if the issues at hand were ever resolved, I believe the game would have run its course like any other. But in our visits and revisits to Boletaria, I would have preferred to think that I was playing the ideal version of the game, instead of just the one with a gorgeous paint job. Hello. I just wanted to thank everyone for getting to the end and watching my video. This is the first time I've done something like this, and editing it was a supremely long process. A video on a topic like this could easily be 1 to 2 hours, and I only wanted it to be 10 to 15 minutes, so you can see how that turned out. Anyway, I don't have any sponsorships or a Patreon to promote because I have no real control over how often I do something like this. But I just wanted to say that it's easy to seem toxic online when you're levying criticism at players of a game or the game itself. So, take care of yourself in this difficult time. And most importantly, remember to have fun. Goodbye now.